Snow fell in long, wandering veils across the empty plains as Tala, a native woman of 20, trudged toward the distant glow of the town's lanterns, her breath a thin ghost rising into the night as if trying to escape before she did. The cold clung to her bones, but she kept walking, clutching the small woven basket, her only belonging, against her chest like a fragile heart trying not to break, hoping the warmth ahead might recognize her existence at last as the wind whispered secrets she was too tired to answer. And still the snow kept falling, as though waiting for her next step in a world that seemed unsure whether to welcome or swallow her whole, leaving her wondering what awaited her beyond that trembling amber light. Lanterns flickered at the edges of the Christmas fest square, their glow trembling like timid promises as Tala stepped into the noise and brightness, her boots sinking slightly into the thick white blanket beneath. Music drifted through the crisp air, cheerful and warm, but it faltered each time she passed, as if even the violin feared touching someone so unfamiliar. She moved carefully, shyly, approaching the first baker with a hopeful question about work, only to feel the sting of his laughter before he spoke, a sound sharp enough to cut through her coat. Her cheeks warmed with shame, contrasting cruelly with the cold as he told her there was no place for someone like her here, and still she bowed her head again, praying the next door would open instead of closing. She tried the butcher, the dressmaker, the lantern carver, each offering the same narrowing eyes, the same dismissive wave, the same whisper that she was foreign to this celebration, as if Christmas itself might wilt in her presence. Tala felt her heart fold inward, like a fragile sheet of paper creasing under hands that never meant to hold it carefully, yet she pushed on because she had learned long ago that survival demanded forward motion, even when hope lagged behind. The snow thickened as the townsfolk's whispers grew louder, louder still when Marjorie Holt, wrapped in velvet and pride, declared publicly that Tala looked too wild to serve civilized guests. The laughter that followed spilled across the square like spilled lantern oil, igniting more mockery as Tala's fingers tightened around her empty basket, wondering if kindness existed in this town at all. Just as she turned away, humiliation burning through her bones hotter than any hearth could be, an elderly baker shook his head at Marjorie's cruelty and muttered that at least he had chores no one else wanted to do. He offered Tala work as a maid for the Christmas fest. Cold tasks, outdoor tasks, tasks that demanded numb hands and quiet endurance, but work was work, and she accepted with a bow that hid her trembling lip. She swept snow from the long wooden tables, hung lanterns with stiff fingers, and wiped frost from benches, all while more townsfolk stared at her as though she were something strange drifting in with the storm. And yet, somewhere behind her, there was a steadiness she did not immediately notice, a gaze lingering not with judgment, but something gentler, patient, curious. That gaze belonged to Wyatt Cole, a cowboy of 30, who stood near the fence with snow settling onto the dark brim of his hat like winter had chosen him as its resting place. He watched Tala labor quietly, watched how she shoved away her own shivers to complete the work others avoided, watched the way she tried to shrink when people mocked her, though her spirit refused to fully bend. His breath fogged the air as he tilted his head slightly, sensing a familiar loneliness in her that echoed his own, the kind forged by years of silent dinners and empty land that stretched too wide around his cabin. His heart stirred as she lifted another lantern, the flame inside it trembling just like she did, and he found himself stepping forward before he even realized he meant to move. She didn't notice him until his boots stopped a few steps away, the snow crunching softly beneath them as though announcing a presence she wasn't sure she deserved. Wyatt said nothing at first, only holding out a pair of warm gloves, their wool thick, soft, and clearly treasured. Tala blinked in confusion, taking a half-step back, expecting the gesture to be followed by a joke at her expense, but Wyatt simply nodded and murmured, "Snow bites hardest at those already hurting." His voice carried warmth, a gentleman's gentleness, a steadiness she had not expected, and she felt her breath hitch in her throat. She hesitated before reaching out, the gloves brushing her fingertips like a fragile bridge built between two lonely worlds. As the Christmas fest opened that evening, Tala moved quietly through the gathered crowd, her new gloves warming her hands if not quite her heart. She served cups of spice cider, arranged pine garlands, and bowed her head whenever laughter curled too close to her. Some children giggled at her braids, a few adults scowled when she passed, as though her presence soured the winter air. When a drunken young man stumbled into her path and knocked a tray from her hands, the clang rang across the square like an accusation. Tala slipped on the slick snow, falling to her knees as the crowd erupted into cruel laughter, the sound wrapping around her like chains she could not break, making her eyes sting with unshed tears. Wyatt moved before the laughter reached its full height, striding through the crowd with a firmness that silenced each mocker one by one until only the wind dared speak. He knelt beside Tala, snowflakes landing gently on her dark hair as though trying to console her. His fingertips brushed the snow from her cheek with a tenderness so unexpected, her breath trembled in her chest. His eyes were steady, protective, and unyielding as he helped her stand, the crowd watching in stunned fascination. And then his voice rose above the quiet, clear and sure, a sentence falling from his lips that cracked the winter air in half. "Act like you belong to me." Tala froze, her heartbeat thundering so loudly she feared the crowd might hear it, the meaning of his words looping in her mind like a song she'd never dared to believe in. Wyatt didn't pull her close to show ownership, but rather to shield her, placing himself between her and every cruel gaze, as though daring anyone to insult her again. He took her hand, not forcefully, but with a question hidden inside his touch, a silent offer of safety if she wished to take it. The townsfolk stared, stunned into silence by his boldness, their mocking expressions melting like snowflakes against warm skin. Tala swallowed hard, unsure whether to step forward or run from the overwhelming warmth swelling in her chest. Wyatt guided her toward the quiet stable behind the festive chaos, away from judgment, away from laughter, away from everything that had made her tremble. The stable smelled of hay and warm earth, a comforting contrast to the biting cold outside. He draped a thick wool blanket around her shoulders and sat beside her on a wooden crate, his presence a calm shelter in a storm she hadn't known how to weather alone. They spoke softly, halting confessions about loneliness, survival, and how winter felt colder without someone to share it with. Tala revealed she rented a tiny attic room with thin walls and a colder floor. Wyatt's expression darkened with concern, though he hid it behind a gentle nod, as if not wanting to frighten her with his instinct to protect. Wyatt walked her home that night, the stable lantern casting a warm halo around them as the snow continued falling like fragile blessings. Tala hesitated when he offered his arm, but when she accepted, the world seemed to still around them, the silence filled only with the soft crunch of snow beneath their boots. He promised to teach her how to ride his horse come morning, insisting she should never walk alone in such weather again, his voice carrying a quiet devotion he wasn't ready to name. Tala felt a warmth she had not known in years, a warmth not of fire, but of being seen, and she wondered if the snow had softened just for them or if her heart had begun to thaw at last. Gossip spread across the town the next day like wildfire in winter wheat, carried by jealous tongues and resentful hearts. They whispered that the cowboy was courting the orphan girl, that he was blinded by pity or desperation, that someone like Tala didn't deserve someone like Wyatt. Tala overheard these murmurs as she continued her maid duties, each word sticking to her like frost that refused to melt, tightening around her ribs until she could barely breathe. Wyatt arrived at her attic room that evening with firewood and warm stew, his jaw tight as she quietly relayed the rumors. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, promising that rumors were snowflakes, cold, fleeting, and irrelevant when weighed against truth. The next afternoon, Tala fled the fest after hearing Marjorie sneer that winter charity had made Wyatt foolish. She sank to her knees behind the church, tears falling into the snow and disappearing before they could even freeze. Wyatt found her there, breathless from searching, and knelt to wipe her tears with his gloved thumb. His voice was a soft confession as he told her she deserved kindness, warmth, and a life untouched by the cruelty of small minds. He admitted that he had felt a pull toward her since he first saw her, a pull he didn't fully understand but couldn't deny, and Tala felt her heart tremble under the weight of his sincerity, unsure whether to believe she was worthy of such devotion. Wyatt led her to his ranch the next morning, snow blanketing the land in pure white silence, as though the world wished to witness what came next. He stopped beneath the tall pine tree near his cabin, where icicles hung like delicate glass ornaments, and knelt before her without hesitation. His breath formed clouds between them as he asked her to become his wife, his voice trembling not with fear but with the enormity of what he was offering, a home, safety, partnership, and the kind of love that grew slowly like a winter fire nurtured with patience. Tala cried, insisting she was only a maid, only an orphan, only a girl who had been mocked more than embraced, but Wyatt shook his head gently, telling her she was the warmth he had searched for through years of empty nights. The proper ceremony took place in the small wooden church at the town's edge, candlelight flickering against the walls as snow drifted through the half-open door like a gentle choir. Tala wore a simple native dress, its beadwork shimmering like captured starlight, her braids adorned with tiny feathers that swayed when she breathed. Wyatt took her hands with reverence, speaking his vows softly but with a strength that resonated through her bones, promising to cherish her through every storm the world dared to send. When their lips met in their first kiss as husband and wife, the candles seemed to glow brighter, as if the winter night itself bowed to their unity. Tala moved into the ranch after the ceremony, bringing warmth to rooms long left untouched by laughter or gentle footsteps. She filled the cabin with quiet joy, folding blankets with care, warming soup on the stove, placing small hand-woven decorations on shelves that had once held only dust. Wyatt taught her how to ride his horse, guiding her hands around the reins, his breath brushing her ear as he spoke softly, sending a warmth down her spine she tried to hide. Their evenings were filled with slow-burning intimacy. Shy looks held a little too long, hands brushing while sharing bread, the quiet comfort of sitting by the fire as snow traced delicate patterns against the window. Nights brought a different kind of closeness, their shoulders touching beneath shared blankets, soft whispers about dreams they'd never dared speak aloud, the gentle way Tala rested her head on Wyatt's chest as though it had always belonged there. They did not rush passion. They let affection bloom naturally, a tender unfolding shaped by trust and vulnerability rather than urgency. Tala found herself smiling more, her heart expanding as she realized that love didn't arrive with grand declarations but through small moments. The way Wyatt stroked her hair absent-mindedly, the way she adjusted his scarf before he left for chores, the way silence felt safe rather than heavy. The town slowly began to soften toward Tala, some out of guilt, others out of witnessing the undeniable gentleness Wyatt offered her each day. Yet she no longer cared whether acceptance came or not. Her world was no longer defined by their voices, but by the steady heartbeat she fell asleep beside every night. She stood taller now, her steps surer, her eyes brighter, as though winter had been transformed from an enemy into a friend she had finally learned to understand. And through it all, the snow continued to fall softly around the ranch, blanketing the world in a peace she had never known, a peace she now shared with the man who had offered her belonging when no one else dared. And so it happened that a girl mocked before a crowd found herself cherished before heaven, her story bending away from cruelty and toward a gentler horizon she had once believed unreachable. When she stood on the cabin porch at dusk, watching the snowfall dance across the land she now called home, Tala understood that belonging was not granted by crowds but grown slowly in the quiet, patient hands of someone who saw past fear into the truth of her soul. And as Wyatt wrapped his arms around her from behind, whispering that the future was wide and warm before them, she closed her eyes and let that truth settle into her heart like snow on a silent winter night. If you ever doubt your worth in a world eager to name you small, remember her story. The way a single act of grace can shift the weight of a lifetime, the way quiet strength can outshine cruelty, the way winter itself teaches us that even the coldest storms cradle hidden seeds of spring. and perhaps, when your own nights feel long and unkind, you will think of Tala standing in falling snow and realize that sometimes it takes just one soul to see you clearly before you learn to see yourself at all.